There's
Hello,
Admiral Blair.
Admiral
How are
Dennis.
Yes.
Admiral, good to see you.
Good to see you, sir.
Very good, very good. Now we have about Admiral Daniel. Would you please introduce Admiral Dennis Blair?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Kim. It's my pleasure to do so. And my privilege and delight to introduce Admiral Dennis Blair, who currently is the not distinguished visiting professor of the practice at UNC Chapel Hill. He's also adjunct professor of national security policy at Duke University. That alone, the fact that he serves at both UNC Duke, demonstrates at a minimum his long-honed ability to deftly understand and navigate hazardous waters. Admiral Blair visits us today as a former sailor, officer, and once the nation's defense intelligence chief. He served in the Navy for over 4 years, culminating in his role as Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Pacific Command, now Indo-Pacific Command. He also served on the Joint Chiefs of Staff and on the National Security Council staff. Since then, he served as President and CEO of the Institute for Defense Analysis, and subsequently CEO and Senior Fellow at Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA, regularly churning out thoughtful reports, analyses, and op-eds. He's also served on several boards, including Atlantic Council, Freedom House, and the National Bureau of Asian Research, which is where I had the good fortune of first meeting the Admiral. Admiral Blair is no stranger to this audience, as he was recipient of the ICAS Annual Liberty Award in 2018 and named an ICAS Liberty Foundation Distinguished Fellow. So please join me in welcoming Admiral Blair for his opening remarks.
Very good. Thank you, Admiral. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks, thanks, Dan. Good. Other familiar faces here: Joe DeTrani, a former unindicted co-conspirator, and in many things that we tried to work on together. And as Dan said, it helps to deal with Duke and the University of North Carolina by not caring a whole lot about basketball. There are other things I care about. And so I'm okay most of the year. But anyway, yeah, I thought what I would do is, I think most of us are trying to get our bearings in this this tumultuous time with this administration ripping up so many flowers and looking at the roots and deciding whether they ought to be put back in the ground or thrown away or whatever. So I think it's hard to stay tethered and to try to remember the basics of American national security and American interests and where we want to go as a country. So what I'm going to do is start at a very high level with some thoughts on where we are as a country, and then narrow down to some regions, finishing with Asia, which of course ICAS and Sasakawa that I was involved with, the NBR, and many of you all have have deep and abiding expertise and a lot to contribute. So let me start by reminding us that, as nearly as I remember, our current president did not run on national security issues. They were not as his campaign as were things like the economy, the social issues, immigration, jobs. So it seemed to be pretty much a domestic focus. And yet, when you look at where so much activity has been since this administration came in, it has been in the areas of national security. He's been really an Energizer bunny across the world in many, many areas. And why is that? I think that's because it is in the area of national security that a president is given the greatest running room, the greatest deference. The Supreme Court, other courts routinely defer to the executive. Congress has all but given up its given up its prerogatives in national security affairs, as I can tell. So if President Trump has one clear instinct, it's for power and the exercise of power, and he, I think, recognized this area, national security, as an area in which he could uniquely dominate the news, take novel approaches, be in charge of things in a way that he could not in domestic areas in which the the instruments of power are much more widely shared. So it was an attractive area for him, and he gravitated towards it. In his first administration, of course, he chose some more seasoned and experienced senior officers to serve in his national security positions, many of whom we all knew: Jim Mattis, Rex Tillerson, many others. And I think, like probably most of us on this call, had a sense that in many areas the United States was headed basically in the right direction in terms of our overall policy. Some things needed to be changed, but they were generally part of this consensus of American policy, which has been there for generations after the consensus that was reached at the end of the Cold War. And I think President Trump felt that these advisors held him back, kept him from doing dramatic things that he wanted to do. And so, of course, he took quite a different approach. He began this approach partway through his first term, of course, by replacing many of his seasoned advisors with people without a lot of experience, who were not going to cause him a great deal of trouble, and in fact probably encourage some of his wilder ideas. And so I guess it should have been no surprise that he sort of picked up with his national security team where he left off at the end of his first term, and appointed a bunch of people who had little experience, strongly held views, and were not going to certainly act as restraints on him. And so that was what we're seeing is a set of policies that are largely built on Donald Trump's personal instincts. He believes that these instincts are superior to conventional wisdom, that they offer novel ways out of areas that perhaps have not made much progress under traditional leaderships. And of course, he, at a deeper level, believes that he should be the center of the action in any sphere in which he is involved. He should be setting the pace. He should be getting the news coverage. And so his approach has been sort of a product of this way of thinking. Now, I think it's also worth mentioning, though, that President Trump, as I've watched him, always goes after some issue or area in which there is an element of truth in the critique that he makes of that. There are things that can be improved in virtually any area of American policy, and there are negative critiques that I'm sure all of us have of specific aspects of specific policies, but he exaggerates them. He uses extreme language about them, and often his alternative policies are not sensible. But but I think it's worth remembering that some of these critiques that he has of American security policies in various regions or in various functional areas do reflect longstanding splits in the American approach to things. It's sometimes difficult to sort out what is just a Donald Trump personal peeve and what is a deep national security issue that well-meaning, intelligent people have been dealing with for a long time. But certainly the issue of engagement versus isolation, how far the United States should hang back versus how much it should be involved. Up to the minute I can recall being involved in this issue at the beginning of the Bush administration, when the Bush administration came in with a group of people who thought that we should simply pull back to the United States, spend a lot of money on space-based forces, and if there were trouble in Asia, then we would come back in and sort it out. And of course, I violently and publicly disagreed with that. There's a whole school of thought about offshore balancing, which is nutty to me, but is based on the idea that you sort of let important regions of the world sort it out themselves, and you only come in and get involved if they can't do it. So this idea of how much the United States does, how much you leave things to either other countries to do or to fester is a longstanding, genuine issue, which he is raising. The idea of allied action versus unilateral action is again one that has been with us ever since the end of the Cold War, when the United States had such military superiority that, frankly, involving the armed forces of any other country was slowed us down rather than speeding us up. And when we would plant lots of flagpoles in front of the headquarters of coalition forces, whether they were in Bosnia, whether they were in East Timor, wherever they were, the idea was more to build a political consensus than it was to improve military efficiency, which could probably have been done better unilaterally. So this issue has been there a long time as well, and of course, with it, this whole issue of the burden of defense spending and a military action. Gosh, I see Chip Gregson here. Ever since he and I were ensigns and second lieutenants, there have been complaints about the Allies not doing their share, freeloading on the United States, and so on. So again, this is an issue with a long and rich history. And of course, there's this constant tension of global interests versus regional approaches, which has been with us for a long time. So I think it's just worth keeping in mind that the issues that the Trump administration has raised in its short time in office are issues that have been with us for a while. And whatever we think of the alternatives that this administration has proposed in certain areas, it's nonetheless that there are smart, well-meaning people who have very different views on both sides of these issues. Finally, I don't think we've settled down yet, but a whole lot of the chattering about the Trump administration initiatives in national security policy have been trying to figure out whether some new bizarre initiative has any legs and is going to last and represent a fundamental change in U.S. policy, or whether it's just going to pass away. This president has an incredible ability not to remember what he did yesterday, or whether it be a promise or a commitment. So if it doesn't work, go try something else. Don't take any responsibility for having said it. Don't take any responsibility for having it not work out. Just press on to it. Press on to a new one. So I think it's difficult to sort out, but of course it makes for thousands of dead electrons and dead trees to say that, oh my God, this action that was taken by the government means the end of Western civilization as we now know it, because it will just become greater and more more widespread. I'm beginning to think that this sort of real tentativeness and fickleness and trying things and then backing away from them when they don't work may play to the advantage of the United States, in that it will not challenge some of the foundations of particularly our regional policies in important areas of the world. Because if you take an example back from the previous administration, if you have 3 summits with Kim Jong-un and you don't get anything, and you walk away from it, then our policy really hasn't changed. Tried a few things, didn't work, back to where we were. So I think there's a chance in some of these areas, because these issues, which the president says personally he can solve before he gets into office, or within a week after he gets into office, or at most a month, and here we are and they haven't been solved, may end up being just attempts along the way, didn't work, move on, revert to the more more enduring policies that we have had in a while. So on my optimistic days, that's what I that's what I think, that this may be a few things that are worth giving some effort to. They probably won't be pursued deeply. Certainly won't be pursued with the zealotry of, say, getting illegal immigrants out of this country, or changing the tax structure, or the cultural issues that are at the heart of the president's support. That the national policy may just see some superficial sandbox type playing without the fundamentals changing underneath. We'll see. We'll see. I hope so. In certainly in the case of Asia, because successive administrations have managed not to screw up what a lot of dedicated people have put in place over many, many years, and I'll come to that. So that's sort of an overall view. When I find myself untethered in national security policy, I tend to think in terms of regions, and I tend to think in terms of the big three regions that matter in the world, which are Europe, the Middle East, and East Asia. And I try to think in those areas: is it the United States or American interests being protected? Are we making progress? Are we losing ground? So let me quickly go around the world, ending with Asia, and see what the actual situation is so far in these three big worlds. And let me start with the one where I think the most damage is being done, and that's Europe. And remember when the Cold War ended, we cut our forces there by the largest amount of our forces anywhere deployed. Our military forces, as you remember, were reduced very little in Asia at the end of the Cold War. They were reduced dramatically in Europe, and there were these first aftershocks of the Cold War, the breakup of the Soviet Union itself, the dissolution of the former Yugoslavia, which actually ended up drawing military forces from the NATO countries into it. Following that, migration was a big problem for Europe. Terrorism from 9/11 on, and when you look at these issues, they absorbed a lot of effort and energy at the time, as issues always do. But they were not issues that the United States and its allies couldn't handle pretty handily. And I'd say from 1989 to 2014, Europe, despite its wealth and importance, just wasn't raising serious issues that are challenging American interests. But then in 2014, when Russia reclaimed the Crimea and took over part of Georgia, this threat of Russian expansion has become serious, does have the risk of fundamentally challenging the interests of the United States. And so this was sort of new, but in fact, it was basically new old, because that's what we'd been dealing with from 1947 all the way up till 1989 was Russia trying to get more power within Europe. So there was a strategy, containment. There was an organization, NATO, to handle it. And the reaction in 2022, when Putin followed up his 2014 adventures with an actual invasion of Ukraine, was relatively quick, relatively familiar. NATO not only sent support to the Ukraine, but it began to strengthen its own defenses to stop it from going further. And the reaction, by and large, was a success. In fact, 2 new members joined. The rest of us have been pursuing for a long time, and Putin managed to get it done in about 6 months, having both Finland and Sweden join NATO. Virtually all European NATO members increased their defense spending, and the war was clearly a disaster from the Russian point of view, driving many of its smartest people out of the country, causing great damage to its economy, which is now beginning to show after the sugar high of increased defense spending has run its course. And so I think to me, the most fundamentally dangerous action that the Trump administration seems to be taking is snatching defeat from the jaws of victory in the case of Ukraine by withholding aid from Ukraine. We risk splitting NATO, giving Russia much of what it's seeking in the Ukraine, and further emboldening Russia. So I guess what I'm most worried about of the things I've seen the administration have to do with Ukraine policy, the lack of support. I mean, it could have a happy ending. The European NATO countries have pledged to step in and continue their aid to Ukraine. The military situation is certainly seems to favor the defense these days, with the ingenuity being shown by Ukrainians, the help that they're receiving. The cyber attacks by Russia have not been nearly as effective as many had predicted. As happens when, I don't know how many times we have to go to this movie in which aggressors think that air attack will break the will of another country, but it hasn't worked in my study of air power since 1910. All it does is strengthen the hatred of the enemy, and by default, the support for the government. So whatever the United States does, we still could come to a proper ending with it, but I just don't see why. I don't see any substantive objection to going all in on helping Ukraine and continuing to hurt Russia. So I think that's the biggest negative that I've seen in recent years. If you turn to the Mideast, when you look at the Mideast since, I don't know, end of the Cold War, name an administration for me that has had a successful policy. I can't. New administration thinks that the group became before them were idiots. Otherwise, why would they have lost the election? They come in with new ideas. I always used to, sympathize with my friends who were the commanders in chief of the Central Command as they dealt with a new administration coming in with a whole bunch of new ideas. None of those new ideas made things much better. Right up the way through the Obama administration and its disastrous handling of the Arab Spring in 2011, which put the whatever you think of the difficulty of it, the United States ended those couple of years in a weaker, less influential position than we had been previously. And as you recall, the first Trump administration had its own ideas. It put no effort into the Middle East peace process. In fact, tried to skip over it by going straight to the Abraham Accords and getting a deal with some Arab states to recognize and have economic relations with Israel, even without any progress on the Palestinian issue. And for a while, and the Biden administration thought, oh, well, maybe you can do it that way. Maybe you don't have to go through the hard yards of actually working out a two-state solution. And so there were 4 years of that. And 2 years of that. And as we all know, that ended in October of 2023 with the barbaric attack by Hamas, which we now learn was to derail the Abraham Accords process, moving on to Saudi Arabia, which would have been, which the Palestinian leaders in Hamas felt would be terrible. So the Trump initiative, again, which was against years of American policy, was actually further adopted by the Biden administration, proved to be kind of cool for a few years, and now has blown up in the situation that we see with a large scale war in the in the region. And the attack on Iran, the setting back of the nuclear program, adds another factor, but it's a factor of a delay, not an ending. So the same dynamic, I think, is still there in many ways in the Middle East, and the elements are sort of sitting there waiting for another political initiative. I'm not sure if the Trump administration is capable of thinking deeply enough about it to come up with a comprehensive approach, which involved dealing with many of the countries and handling Israel and so on. But in general, when you measure what the Trump administration has done in the Middle East, it's no worse than most other administrations had done in previous times, and there's certainly some possibilities that it might be better. So that brings us to East Asia, of course, which most of us on this call believe is the most important region for the United States in the long term. And it's becoming, of course, increasingly clear that for the decade plus that Xi Jinping has been in power, he has pursued a comprehensive and dogged campaign using the full suite of tools available to an authoritarian government to become the dominant country in East Asia. After that, I imagine he'll see if he wants to continue to push that elsewhere, and of course that involves pushing the United States out of that position. I think, again, going back to the first Trump administration, to its credit, the first Trump administration was the first one to push back with real action against this Chinese campaign with its tariffs in 2017. It used to drive me crazy when I was in the Obama administration to this attitude that our president can talk their leader into changing his mind about what he was doing, and President Obama would come back with some commitment, you name it. No cyber economic espionage, no military buildup of those 7 reefs in the South China Sea. Little time would go by, and oops, more economic espionage just by cyber hackers wearing different hats. Lots of runways and surface-to-air missiles on these reefs, and continuing pressure. And I would say, to its credit, in the first administration, the Trump administration actually did something. Now, it was tariffs, and that was based on this sort of bizarre idea that this president has, that if we can have a neutral or favorable trade balance with every country in the world, we're in great shape. But nonetheless, it was the first time, I think, in recent time, that the United States has actually done something to oppose China. Again, the Biden administration, led by an active NSC staff, actually built on that policy of actually opposing Chinese aggression at various times, and in many cases it took good actions. And I think American policy was going a good direction in Asia. We can talk about it in the question period we want, and there are many experts here, but I just got back from Taiwan about a week ago, and I really think we may have passed the point of worst military danger to Taiwan, that now the trends are actually going in the direction of it being more and more difficult for China to successfully attack across the strait. And if they can't attack across the strait, none of the other scenarios that you read about, the lesser measures, blockades, taking offshore islands, airstrikes, make any sense. So we may actually be in a favorable trend in the military balance in Taiwan, which then would have a lot of implications for our relations with our other more weighty defense agreements with Japan, with the Republic of Korea, and more distantly, of course, with and with some differences, the Philippines, Thailand, and Australia. So the question is, when the Trump administration turns its attention away from just trade to other aspects of the security situation in East Asia, what will they do? We've had trade disputes with the advanced economies in Japan and Korea in the past. We've managed to work them out. I think maybe there are people on this call who have been involved in those negotiations. They were tough. My friends who have been involved in them would say dealing with the Chinese is tough. Dealing with our friends the Koreans is tougher. And when it comes to economic issues, but there's always a feeling that we were going to solve these because the greater issues were staying together from a security point of view, which is what gave us the opportunity to fight with each other about 5% tariffs on this or 20% tariffs on that. And if we lose that underlying assumption with Japan, with the Republic of Korea, that is a real setback, which we need to be alert for. The initial signs of the security aspects of our policy in Asia, though, are pretty positive. Secretary Hegseth has no depth in the East Asian affairs, but if you read his remarks in Singapore, they could have been written by, any of his the advisors to the Secretary of Defense from prior years. They were tough. They called out China. They committed the United States. In fact, they went even then, as President Biden himself had done. They went even further than the Taiwan Relations Act in terms of some of the things they said. So I think that the fundamental instincts of the Trump administration are competitive, and if there's any big competitor to the United States, is China. So I think the president's own gut instincts will be that he's not going to be pushed around by Xi Jinping and his policies. He certainly does not seem to have any kind of this bizarre personal attraction for Xi Jinping that he seems to have for Vladimir Putin and Viktor Orban and some of these other thugs who are in power in other countries. Luckily, that doesn't take place. That doesn't exist in the case of China. So I'm hopeful that a tough, competitive overall policy will be pursued by this administration, and that our clever friends who are trade negotiators will be able to come out with ways that we can agree on, and that will keep us on track. Certainly, so far, with the president's handling of tariffs, there are people he do listen to, and those are the people who publish where the stock market's going and where the bond prices are going. And I can't think of a business a business observer that think it's a good thing for the United States to bring Smoot-Hawley back to a modern economy. What bothers me, of course, is the lack of opportunity in East Asia. I mean, what we should be doing with Japan, with the Republic of Korea, is breaking any Chinese advantage on supply chains that affect important industries, the ones laid out in Project 2025, in which China is clearly trying to dominate the future global industries. And if the United States, China, Korea, other countries could get their acts together in terms of building chips, protecting supply chains, targeting tariffs against Chinese products, which are undercutting Western products because they are disregarding environmental factors, subsidizing the industries, and so on. That's sort of the opportunity missing. While we're fighting with each other about where we're going to go with the tariffs on Japanese pickup trucks and Korean chips, we ought to be working on this larger market. And I don't know, that may have to be put off a few years. So that's what my sort of overall looking at the three big areas here. What are the concerns? When I thought about it a month ago, I was thinking that sort of loose talk about Greenland, Panama Canal, Canada, for God's sake, and other countries was going to have a big effect on our alliance relationships, and it still might. But I think that sophisticated observers have learned that a lot of these are trial balloons. Although the president and some of his close advisors may believe them, when they run up against the practical difficulties, they realize they're not winners. They don't cause economic success. They don't have a whole lot of support domestically, and they're probably not worth pursuing over the long term. So again, I think the main threat to allied relationships is spillover from bitter tariff and economic negotiations. I grieve, as I think almost all of us do, for the demise of USAID and Voice of America. Voice of America, for God's sake, what a nice low-cost way to undermine authoritarian regimes from Pyongyang to Moscow and all points in between. And here we seem to have wanting to throw it away, although I haven't read the latest court case. USAID, we all had our favorite policies or programs that we rolled our eyes at, but there were many policies which were a great benefit not only to the countries concerned but to the United States, and that will take some rebuilding. The Doge, I guess it's pronounced, and the exodus of talent from the very bureaucracies that we're going to depend on to carry out any sort of a sophisticated policy, and those who remain looking over their shoulders is just a heavy tax on doing things smart. And then in the three areas that I mentioned, I told you what my concerns are about Europe. In the Middle East, I think there are real opportunities that things could turn out better than they have been for many years, but there's also an equal possibility that either due to forces beyond our control or to stupid moves on our part, they could turn out worse. And in East Asia, I have my fingers crossed that we won't screw it up too badly, and that as I say, the concentration of the military situation, I think, may have passed the point of greatest danger. If sensible trade policies can be worked out, that's good. And I'm somewhat encouraged in that while the United States was distracted in the Middle East with the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, I think the mature democracies in East Asia, our allies, stepped up. It was certainly true of Japan. It was true of Korea in some key areas. It was true of Australia, and they were really the ones who shaped what a good overall democratic, market-based allied country policy should be. And I'm hoping that same sort of that same sort of leadership will continue to exist in those countries, and that our best weapon in keeping us all together, which is a combination of Chinese arrogance, stupidity, and aggression, will keep us together. And if we do stick together, then we can handle China just fine. So let me stop there with my just sort of overall view, and let's turn this into a discussion, since many of you have been thinking about the same things also. So back to you, Dan, I guess.
So before we get into Q&A, let me make a short remark. ICAS is not an agent of any government or foreign principal. There's no foreign funds involved in ICAS activities. That said, okay, General Gregson, are you ready to jump in?
I am, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Dennis. Welcome back from Taiwan. I'm glad you were there for that exercise.
Yeah, Chip.
You had a good effect. Hong Kong is even bigger and better this year, planned to be anyway, so that's a good deal. Shortly after I left government service, I went to Korea to give a talk, and it was the room was full of cadets, and I'd been told repeatedly by our people, don't bring up nuclear weapons, don't bring up nuclear weapons, don't bring up nuclear weapons. They don't want to talk about it. Very first question, how come we don't have nuclear weapons? Where do you see this going in the future? It's one thing to talk about extended deterrence and to do things to try and build confidence in extended deterrence, but it's another thing to talk about extended deterrence when we seem to be adopting hostile trade policies.
Yeah, I know, and I think I saw Skip Sharp on the list too. So he also, I'd love to hear Skip's opinion and anyone else. But I guess I've been more deeply involved in the extended deterrence discussion in Japan than I have in Korea. But I think some of the same dynamics are there, and I think those of us who have been watching this for a while knows that this European countries have been wrestling with this for a long time, and in working that issue, a large menu of steps have been developed within that alliance, within the NATO alliance, all the way up to the so-called dual key systems, in which you have American nuclear weapons stationed in countries like Turkey and the Netherlands, the Turkish and Dutch pilots having been fully trained on delivering these weapons, the airplanes having been made able to carry them and all, and that's sort of a awfully close to the Netherlands and Turkey having their own nuclear weapons without quite being there. And short of that, there are certainly a whole range of measures, from everything from landing B-2s in other countries' bases, or with the Americans running nuclear scenarios, having declarations and so on. So I sort of think that, or I do think that these negotiations will open up seriously with both Republic of Korea and Japan, and that I don't see any way under the current circumstances of keeping the situation where it is. I think some set of these measures, short of or perhaps even including dual capable aircraft, will be implemented with great fanfare, and that if the leaders of both governments are convinced that these are important assurances, then they will suffice. So I think I'm optimistic that some extended deterrence talks with actual changes, increasing some of these intermediate steps will reassure both Republic of Korea and Japan. I think we do have to continue to emphasize that the greatest tool, it's macabre, but it's true, that safeguards Japanese and Korean from a nuclear threat are the American families that are located in those two countries. It is inconceivable to me that if North Korea were to drop a nuclear weapon on South Korea or on Japan, it would not kill tens of thousands of Americans, and that any president would not retaliate when we have 16,000 nuclear weapons and North Korea has what, 40 or 50. I mean, North Korea will become glass in one afternoon. And so I think the elements are there. We just need to negotiate some of these techniques that have been worked out to demonstrate the robustness of the security guarantee, and we can move on. So that would be my prediction and my answer. I don't know if Skip Sharp is here. I'd love to hear his opinion.
Is Skip Sharp out there? General Sharp?
Hey, good evening. Yes.
Good evening. Go ahead, Walter.
Thank you.
Right.
Sir, great to see you again. And thanks for your comments. I agree with what you said. I think the extended deterrence, especially the fact that it is really working hard now from not just a bilateral U.S.-South Korea perspective, but also trilateral with Japan.
Yeah.
Everything that I've heard is that's real, both in planning and exercises, and I think that will. I don't see in the near future South Korea. I can't speak to Japan, but that's Japan too. I think aren't going to go down the road of building nuclear weapons. And I think a lot of it is because of what we have greatly increased as far as discussions on commitments and planning and all. I mean, when I was there, 2008, 2011, I was forbidden to speak the word nuclear, period. Any exercises or anything. We've gone a heck of a long way since then. So, sir, as long as I've got the question here, I would like to get your thoughts on, command and control relationships in the Pacific. I've started to talk about, rather than great power competitions of U.S., Russia, U.S., China, it's great alliance competitions, U.S., or let me go to the other side. It's, Russia, China, North Korea working together as an alliance, loosely or more formally as alliance, versus U.S., Republic of Korea, Japan, and Australia, and other countries. So I firmly believe that if there is conflict, whether it's Taiwan or North Korea or China and Japan, it's not going to be one-on-one. It's going to be a regional conflict. And so your thoughts on how to put together what adjustments need to be made to the command and control structure. I mean, I'll maybe tip my hat here. I still think Combined Forces Command is the strongest command anywhere in the world because of how combined it is, both in planning and training and operations and the deterrent effect. But at the same time, I fully am aware that if something happens on the peninsula, things are going to happen in Japan and maybe in Taiwan also. And so where does PACOM stand in all of that? Is there time to look at a Northeast Asia command? I mean, it's, again, I've been out of command now for 14 years, and we dealt with North and South, but that's no longer what's going to happen. So how do you structure a command structure from a U.S. perspective, from an alliance perspective, to be able to deal with a regional conflict, but hopefully at the same time keeping the power of Combined Forces Command on the peninsula intact? I mean, your thoughts on that, sir. You've dealt with Northeast Asia Command in your previous years and all of that, but where your current thoughts are based upon where the world is right now, where I think the real potential danger is out there.
Thank you, Skip.
Yeah, I always thought that the combined forces model is where U.S.-Japan command relations should go, frankly. And I see the steps that have been taken recently that were started by Admiral Aquilino, and continued as being a big step in that direction. And I've been basically trying to pour gas on that fire and say, let's have a building in Okinawa that has the American commander for contingencies and the Japanese commander for contingencies working there side by side. I mean, it's just the combined forces model, and I think it would work. I think it would work very well with in the event of conflict for the Pacific commander to be playing the traditional role of triple region, the two forward 4-star commanders fighting their pieces of it, whether if conflict had broken out in one, and as you say it had become general, we'd have the two allied fighting forces being commanded at the right level. A certain amount of coordination along the seam would be required. So I think it's going in the right direction now. I mean, maybe some on this call are better informed than I, but if there is a kerfuffle about Taiwan, I'm 90% sure that Japan would be involved, but I'm less sure that Korea would be involved unless China somehow pulled Mao Zedong 1950s, pull the puppet on one end of the American string, and while you're concerned with the other side. And I'm not sure that North Korea would go along with that or not. So I think it makes sense to have, and when I think of the forces involved, the exercise programs, all of that, it seems to me having a separate commander centered on the Korean Peninsula makes sense, and having a separate commander worried about the maritime fights, Senkaku's Taiwan, South China Sea, makes another one. So I think that two combined forces commands, PACOM back in trying to look at the whole theater is where I think it ought to go. And I think we've taken no steps that are incompatible with that. And that's the way to run it. Would that work from your point of view, or do you think that's not enough? Do you think we need a forward commander who would basically be in command of all of the forces from the 38th parallel down to the South China Sea?
I think the difficulty comes in when you get down to how combined forces command in Korea, and maybe the same in Japan if you form that, works from an operational perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as combined forces command reports directly to the chairman and keeps PACOM informed.
Right.
And I fought for that, violently against several opposers back when I was on the joint staff and in Korea. I won't go there, but now it's with this more regional aspect, the role of where PACOM stands, Indo-PACOM stands, and can you really have a combined command where the other country, Korea or Japan, let's just take Korea, says that, okay, if we're in a war fight, I'm going to combined forces commands working for Indo-PACOM, not for the Secretary of Defense.
Yeah.
And there's issues there both positive and minus to be able to do that. From a deterrent perspective, I had this discussion with the chairman yesterday, right after church. From a deterrent perspective, the fact that we truly have a combined command and that both nations are involved, I think is pretty powerful. And, the fact that Brunson can pick up the phone and call directly to the chairman and talk, and as importantly, he can pick up the phone and talk to the Minister of Defense and does that on a routine basis is really powerful. So, I was very adamant back in my day that was the right structure, but I don't have the answer, but I'm less positive of that now because of my true belief that any conflict there is going to be regional, and Indo-PACOM's got to be really key in that from a U.S. perspective. No good answer, but that's I think something that we really need to struggle with is how you set that up. Don't lose the deterrent value. Don't lose the combined nature of combined forces command. Don't lose the ability for that commander to literally pick up the phone and talk and say, hey, I need a call with the chairman, and I need a call with the Minister of Defense, or I need to call with the SecDef and the minister, and it happens. And because of the relationship and not just the relationship, but how a structure is put together. So again, no good answers, but those are the things that I think that we really need to look at and again, it's not just a warfighting perspective, it's a deterrent perspective also.
Yeah, I think that's very wise. What I've learned is that although we who have worn uniforms care about chain of command, the civilians just don't. They'll pick up the phone and talk to anybody, and I think the Pacific Command commander working himself into a position of actually being the overall coordinator will depend on the skill and effectiveness of that person. And if he's not very effective, then he's going to get bypassed, and Washington will be micromanaging the way it always does. Yeah. And I think that'll be true no matter what we write on paper. So I think that we ought to set it up best for the warfighting. That we have our forces and the nature of the terrain and all are accepted, and then it's really up to the Pacific Command commander, by a combination of personal relationships, the skill with which he carries out his job, and his relationships with these two 4-stars who are running the day-to-day fight, as to whether he can inject that wider view and play the role that I think he can uniquely play, that is not resident necessarily in Washington or in Seoul or Japan. So I guess I come down on set it up the best way you can, but recognize that when the balloon goes up, what's written down on a piece of paper is going to be largely superseded by the people who have the jobs at the time.
Very good. Chip Gregson, you want to jump in?
That was a very enlightening discussion. The Japanese have stood up their first ever joint operational headquarters now, and they're waiting for the U.S. to tumble onto what kind of a relationship we're going to have so that they get their 4-star counterpart. I've heard rumors that it'll be, the rose will be pinned on the commander of Pacific Fleet, and he'll be a commander with 2 headquarters, one headquarters in Hawaii, one headquarters in Japan, the newly redesigned and reinforced U.S. Forces Japan. Since they got it up and running, there hasn't been any commentary on it or anything that I know of. So I assume the Japanese are doing their usual very careful and very effective training program and writing various manuals on how to do this. I do believe, as was mentioned, that the Combined Forces Command is really the platinum iridium standard for global combined operations. It's a very unique thing, and Korea and the United States are fortunate we have that command in there. The trick is going to be now, how do we incorporate Japan, Taiwan, Philippines into a regional conflict here without losing the tremendous effectiveness in the Combined Forces Command. So I'll be very interested to see how all this sorts out. Thank you.
Thank you, Chip. So, Ambassador Detrani.
No, thank you. Thank you, Senator Kim. Admiral Blair, let me just say your comments were just outstanding. It's so great seeing you, and thank you for all those years of great, great service. I can't think of anyone who has made so much of a contribution to our nation's national security. Thank you so much for what you've been doing, and you continue to do. Let me ask a question about Taiwan. You just said you returned from Taiwan. I think back to Lee Kuan Yew's memoirs, and where he said, when China feels they're capable of taking Taiwan through kinetic means, be careful, they'll probably do it.
Right.
This is Lee Kuan Yew. I mean, this is a man whom we all respected. So we hear so much about 2027, and that China would be militarily prepared to use military means to unify with Taiwan. Your comments a few minutes ago indicated you were somewhat optimistic that whether it's embargo or an onslaught or what have you, Taiwan is in a better position now. So that's one question. Taiwan, and do you think China would use its military to unify? I mean, I just think of all the negative aspects to doing that. But having said that, all brilliant people are saying, watch 2027, because they'll likely pull the trigger. And my second question, if I may, is a lot of meetings in Beijing and or at least going back a year ago, and track 2s, 1.5s. And so the element of hubris always strikes me. The sense that it's destiny says China will be the dominant global power in 2049. Am I missing something? Because I really feel that could be an element of weakness. Because if you are that overconfident, you may not prepare well enough to ensure that you in fact, you survive. So, Admiral, over to you, and thank you again for your great comments tonight.
Yeah, Joe, it's been you and I have worked together on a lot of scraps, and it's good to see you again. And we need a separate conversation about what's being done to the DNI and the ODNI staff, because I thought we did some really good work.
Yes.
I thought you as the most important mission manager, and some of the others did some things that the community could not do on its own without somebody with a striped shirt and a whistle, and which you provided, and I tried to support. But on your particular question, I think the 2027 date, which one of my successors raised in his farewell testimony to Congress and all, if you read you don't want to get calloused about it, but I've just lived through too many Chinese premier dates that they want something done by, to not to think that this is it's sort of the Elon Musk approach, set an impossible deadline, and you'll get more than you would have before. But when it comes to the actual time to make a decision, you're not going to go to war just because you said 8 years ago that you wanted to be ready at this time. So I had that gut reaction based on, watching Chinese leaders say this over the years. Jiang Zemin had his time, Hu Jintao had his time. But I also, there's a pretty good discussion of that in the latest DoD publication on it's last year's publication on the military strength of China, and it points out the context pretty clearly that 2027 is a step along the way to 2049, and not not a time. So that sort of reinforced my idea that this is a goad to the bureaucracy and so on. And you know, if you think 2027 is a good date, it's just not good to lose a couple of ministers of defense that you can't find and fire a few more. You know, this is sort of Stalin in 1940, right? You know, decimating his senior officer corps when it's getting ready to attack him, and so that particular date doesn't worry me terribly. I like you, I'm worried about the hubris. I mean, it all began in 2008, right? When with the Beijing Olympics and the American self-inflicted Great Depression. That to me, that was a hinge point at which Chinese leaders said, you know, we don't have to listen to these Americans. They can't even run their own economy, and we can run a pretty good Olympics without them. So let's listen to ourselves. And ever since then, I've seen this attitude. And then, of course, it became accentuated after Xi Jinping came in. I mean, the third plenum before Xi Jinping took over looked pretty promising, and then all of a sudden, after he takes over, it's power, and we're going to any decision regarding the economy is taken in terms of control rather than in terms of the proven ways to raise the economy. So I think you're right to be worried about that. Hubris. I guess cutting against that is the idea that you know, what I've seen with the Chinese is that they talk in this bombastic fashion, and then they go close the door and have a meeting, and I imagine the conversation in there goes along the lines of, okay, what do we really think? You know, can we pull this thing off? And I know we said we can walk across the Taiwan Strait and everything will be fine, but can we really do it? Do we trust the PLA? What might I think I have found a rather forward aggressive form of talk coexisting with a rather conservative decision-making process. And that's always given me some comfort. I do think the lessons of Ukraine are cut in Taiwan's favor rather than in China's favor. I mean, the Ukrainians drove the Black Sea Fleet out of 3/4 of the Black Sea with American intelligence supporting some pretty improvised weapons. And last week in Taiwan, I saw that lesson had not been lost on the Taiwanese, and they were coming up with drones that would attack amphibious ships and all sorts of innovative ways. Now, whether their training can support that or not, I'm not sure, but it can certainly the Taiwanese armed forces have a heck of a lot better chance at looking like the Ukrainians than the PLA troops do. So I think that it's the play out of that hubris versus a realistic view of could China actually win if it did it. And my thinking on these lesser contingencies, which mesmerized a lot of my successors at Indo-PACOM, and I laid this out when I was in Taiwan, and I didn't get really strong pushback, is, okay, let's say China takes, I mean, the offshore islands are easy. You know, those are 3 miles away, and China could take those in a heartbeat. But let's say they took Penghu, which is 70% of the way across the strait. There are only two alternatives there. Either Taiwan gives up and says, oh yeah, okay, we give up. We'll join you as your next province. Or Taiwan says, nah, I'm really angry. I'm gonna stay in the fight. That sort of pushes the decision back on China, and they only have two choices themselves at that time. Either they escalate to achieve their original war aims. They were hoping that Taiwan would capitulate with lesser pressure. They didn't. What do they do now? They either back off or they escalate. Now they could cover it up cover up, back off with all sorts of, we taught Taiwan a lesson. They'll know not to mess around with us anymore, da 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 da. But it would still be seen as a defeat. And as you play that thinking out for each of these intermediate steps that they might take, a full blockade of China, which we played in the war game last or 2 weeks ago, to missile strikes on critical infrastructure in Taiwan, it still puts you in that position of, if Taiwan doesn't give up, and the history of countries giving up to initial strikes is not a very distinguished one from the Chinese point of view. They generally get pissed off and rally around whatever government they have and go on. So China has got to have confidence that it could actually invade and hold Taiwan at the end of the day. And so long as that is high risk, so long as there's a chance that won't work, then the conservative decision by any Chinese government would be, let's not start up this escalation ladder. Let's dominate with the kinds of things they're doing now: gunboat diplomacy, economic coercion, fifth columns within Taiwan, bribing them and all. And that I still think that looks like a surer, less dangerous course of action than rolling the dice and going. So that's kind of how I see it, Joe. And the hubris is the wild card, because you can't quantify it. You can't do ops analysis on it. You have to make a judgment about whether somebody could do something really stupid because they're angry. And Thucydides taught us that you don't start careful ops analysis calculation. It's honor, fear, and interest, and if the honor is big, as it was in the case of Japan, if the honor is big, as it was in the case of North Korea, and the hubris, of course, is what generates this honor that Thucydides talked about, they might give it a shot. And so I think we really have to be, Taiwan primarily, and we supporting it have to make sure that if they do, they lose. So it's not something I think we can predict without doing the hard work.
Thank you, Admiral.
Thank you, Dennis. Shaquille James, go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Admiral, for your comments. Very much appreciated. Captain James, U.S. Air Force, ICBM operator, as well as Asia specialist. Just want to say as well that I completely agree with a lot of your viewpoints on Taiwan. I find that they tend to be quite non-standard, but they're very much a more grounded view of the situation. That being said, I kind of wanted to peel back a little bit more on the conversation about the lessons learned that Taiwan could have from Ukraine. As you said, there are a lot of lessons that Taiwan could learn from Ukraine. Could you explore that a little bit more? Obviously, Taiwan, or rather Ukraine's a country that doesn't have a navy and yet managed to cripple the Black Sea Fleet. And I imagine Taiwan finds that very, very interesting. So could you just talk a little bit more about the lessons that Taiwan can learn from Ukraine?
Sure. Does the Air Force have a FAO program now?
Yes, they do, sir, and that is on my radar.
What's that? And are
They do, and it's on my radar.
Oh, good, yeah, because that's pretty important. Yeah, I mean, a person I got to know quite well when I was in Taiwan is Admiral Lee Simin, who was, when I first went over to 2003, he was a Navy captain who was in charge of the Joint Education and Training Center, which was the control team for putting on the CPX portion of Han Quan. Brilliant guy, and he worked his way up through the Navy, was chief of the Navy, and then he became the chief of defense, or the chairman of their Joint Chiefs. And he published something called the Overall Defense Concept, ODC. It was an actual document And his analysis was that the time of greatest vulnerability of any Chinese invasion fleet was when it came to the area where they had to put the soldiers into the landing craft and come ashore. And you know, it doesn't take a Major Ellis USMC to understand that. Everybody knows that, and that's the time when they'd be virtually within sight of the Taiwanese coast. That the big ships would be sitting there in the water, not moving fast. They could only be defended part way, and that's the time when they were most vulnerable. So he said that Taiwan should subtract a lot of its emphasis on big ticket items, ships, submarines, tanks, aircraft, and put it on small, mobile, resilient, lethal systems, which could be used to disable, if not sink, the Chinese amphibious fleet when it came close to the relatively small number of well-known Taiwanese beaches where the only places that you can put large numbers of troops ashore. And I guess this must have been in when was he chief? It was about 2015 or so. Maybe somebody can correct me, but it was about maybe 10 years ago, something like that. Maybe a bit closer. His recommendations received mostly lip service because there was still this idea that that Taiwan ought to spend most of its money on the big ticket platforms to contend with the big ticket platforms that China was building. But nonetheless, there was some doctrine attention and some money put into at that time the systems that you could think of: harpoons on wheels, a domestically made Taiwanese anti-ship missile that was mobile, and in subsequent Hong Kong games, these proved to be quite effective. So it was that kind of thinking of attacking the amphibious shipping when it had to make the transition from coming across the strait to putting the soldiers in the boats that was the most vulnerable. And all of the things we've seen Ukraine do with drones, with explosives strapped to them, are very applicable to that. It's a stretch to think that a 5-kilo pack of TNT on a drone would sink a big 40,000-ton amphibious ship. But if you can knock out the antennas, you can cause a lot of damage on deck, and you can mess up any kind of an embarkation. And of course, the Taiwanese know where these beaches are. They have them heavily defended. It's very difficult for China to maintain air superiority or an initial bombardment over these places. So the sort of dispersed, large-scale, small weapon ideas that Ukrainian soldiers have pioneered are very applicable to this overall defense concept that was laid out there. And when I was in Taiwan 2 weeks ago, I saw this ODC, this overall defense concept, receiving much more public support than I'd ever seen before. There's actually a supplemental defense budget which is being passed in order to buy these, in order to buy weapons that conform to that. And so that's basically some of the specifics behind that kind of thinking.
Very good. Daniel, do you want to jump in? Dan.
Well, I do want to be mindful of the time. Perhaps a broad question. You can take it any way you like, Admiral. But what does success in East Asia look like to you? Because we've identified current and emerging opportunities and challenges. But if we were to take a step back,
what does a successful East Asian landscape look like to you, and how would we know if we've achieved it?
Yeah, frankly, Dan, I don't think it will be achieved until the current Chinese model crumples. It's too much to think that based on its own thinking, it would one day say, "Oh, just made a big mistake. Well, we're gonna be more like Japan than we are like China today." So I'm afraid we're in the position that we have been with powers that are challenging for Asian dominance is to oppose them pretty much across the board: military deterrence, economic competition, and I think that as I said, the military deterrence side of that is we pretty well know what the play is, and I think we can make that play Indo-PACOM after a lot of I thought sort of looking around at the wrong places, realizes that it really boils down to deterrence across the Taiwan Straits, and I think the trends are going now towards the United States. Hypersonic missiles that we are now building and putting on ships and putting them back on airplanes, and the Army is building them. I mean, these just make the extremely thick belt of Chinese surface-to-air missile systems around their bases where they'd have to load up their ships and fly their airplanes and do the command and control. These are now completely vulnerable to these Mach 7 maneuvering missiles that are coming in. So I think the military deterrence side is going to do nothing but straighten. So that really takes us to the economic competition side. And I'm no expert in that, but as I've watched, I guess I'm most familiar with sort of the chip wars. You know, I hadn't really realized certainly when I was out in Pacific Command, this incredibly complex international supply chain situation to make, the thing that sits inside of that, crosses back and forth across the Pacific dozens of times. Some work is done in Korea, incredible. And, for the past 10 years, both China and the United States have been looking for ways that they can use that part of the supply chain that they control to their advantage without shooting themselves in the foot at the same time, because it excites a reaction from somebody else who controls another side of it. So what we seem to be doing is building these two parallel universes of certain systems, certainly in the IT area, and maybe we're starting it in other areas too, pharmaceuticals, industrial materials, and so on. And maybe the world is much more dividing up into this China-centered and this Western country-centered camps with much more limited cooperation and overlap than we thought could happen 10, 15 years ago. And, I think it's going to take more than 4 years to do that. And I think it's going to take, I don't think this administration, even if it pursues a series of suicidal policies, can actually succeed enough in 4 years to mess things up completely badly. And then, so there we are with two sort of separate systems: Japan, Korea, the United States, Australia, having one system in one of these 10 areas that are going to be most important in the future. China having another one with just its 1.2 billion people, and that's about it. And that Xi Jinping passes from the scene. President Trump goes on to his rich retirement, and the table has been reset, and a fresh set of leaders thinks, maybe we could overlap a little bit more. Maybe we know it's not worth it to fight So let's have a sort of a watchful, suspicious cooperation. I think that's kind of the way I see an optimistic scenario, and it's too easy to paint the pessimistic scenario. So I won't go with that. But I think we could get there. I think we could get there, and I don't think it depends on one person. I think it depends on a lot of things. I mean, where I felt so fortunate to have been the Indo-Pacific commander, or rather than the Middle East or the European commander, was that we really knew the plays in the Pacific, whether we were diplomats or military officers or businessmen and all. We sort of knew what the idea was: stay close to your allies, be suspicious of the Chinese and the North Koreans and the Vietnamese, but to the extent that you could cooperate without screwing yourself, do so. And that was kind of what we did. And I really don't see what was wrong with that. I think we could do more of that, and we could perhaps come to more of a stable situation. But going back to Joe's point, I think the guy with the most hubris is Xi Jinping himself, right, Joe? I mean, the guy just thinks he can do it all. And when he passes from the scene, leaving a wreckage of the economic system in which the best, most productive parts of their economy have been decimated, in which these bloated, inefficient state-owned industries, yes, they have a big share of the export market, but they're not making any progress. Otherwise, Japanese or Chinese people are dissatisfied that a new leader will come along and saying, "Well, that wasn't very much fun. Let's try something else." So I guess that's where I come out on it.
Thank you. CJ, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Kim, and thank you, Admiral, for your time and sharing your wisdom. My name is Hee-jae Jung. I'm an undergraduate student at Azusa Pacific University in Southern California. It's my honor to ask you a question. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on the cybersecurity threats and challenges posed by China's and North Korea's rapidly advancing AI and hacking capabilities. From your experience as Director of National Intelligence, how did the U.S. respond to such threats during your tenure? And how do you think these challenges have evolved since then? Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is an area in which we are at war all the time. This is not something that you just practice. Companies are under threat from both criminal organizations and from government organizations. Our government organizations are under threat. We have these new vulnerabilities that seem to be discovered every few months, and then we go in and patch them and go on to the next thing. I think it's not clear to me that artificial intelligence will be an advantage either to an attacker or to a defender. I don't think that's clear yet. So although a person with AI, a North Korean hacker with AI can write an email if he's spearfishing with not making so many mistakes in grammar or misspellings or some of the things that used to key us to that. I think some of the tools will also favor the defender in this area. So I'm not sure that cuts one way or the other. And so I think it boils down to people. And I think I spent a lot of time trying to whip the Japanese into improving their cyber security, because I think it's just it's not nearly as good as it should be. I'm not as familiar with the Republic of Korea's, but the American cybersecurity, as long as we have the National Security Agency, the Cyber Command, these areas in which we train whole lots of people to be cyber defenders, and then after they get out, they go get jobs in private industry where they also work on cybersecurity. They're still in touch with the people who are back in government. And I think again the Ukraine example is pretty encouraging. Back in 2014, the Russian hackers took a single power plant actually off a line in the Ukraine, And when they actually invaded in 2022, they've clearly unleashed all of their hacking capability. And in the case of Russia, it's quite sophisticated. And yet, President Zelensky is still talking to people. The lights are still on, and Russia has had to go back to the old way of attacking critical infrastructure, which is bombing it. So I think it's one of those races that it's the offense against the defense against the offense, and we'll be fighting that for the indefinite future. So I'm sort of neither encouraged nor discouraged by AI.
Thank you, Dennis. Bill Brown, go ahead quickly. Time is almost out. Go ahead, Bill. Unmute your button.
Okay, sorry then.
Okay.
Yes, I say Director Blair because I worked for you when you were at DNI. And I was in Joe DeTrone's shop, her great little North Korea mission manager's shop.
Okay.
A long-time China, Korea economist. So I've worked in the intel and government on economics on East Asia for about 40 years now. And I'm wondering, I went to your last speech, when your farewell speech at the Liberty Crossing. And you were then replaced by another friend of mine, Jim Clapper, they'd been in Korea with me. But I'm just wondering what you think has happened with the DNI, ODNI, the DNI, the NIC, all this over the last, what's probably been 20 years or so.
Yeah.
I guess from my view, it's been kind of a nothing short of a disaster. I mean, so many issues that have come up. I mean, I think our intel, you're painting a fairly positive picture of the past, but you're not mentioning Afghanistan, you're not mentioning Iraq, you're not mentioning North Korea nukes, you're not mentioning Ukraine very much. I mean, you're one-sided on Ukraine. All these issues, I don't know. So I'm just curious, what do you think? And now I guess the ODNI is kind of under attack. I think for good reason, the way they have treated, however you like or dislike Trump, he was pretty much screwed, I think, wasn't he, by the Russia Gate business. And I think it's having a long-term impact on the. But anyway, I'm just interested in how you're looking at the ODNI, if you're looking at it at all.
Yeah, I don't go to briefings anymore at Liberty Crossing, so I don't know a lot about the inside. But I was, as you know, a firm believer that the ODNI organization was necessary to improve our intelligence. I think the ironic thing was that where we didn't need it was in combating terrorism. The shock of 9/11 was so great that nobody was ever going to sit on a piece of intelligence about terrorism ever again. It was so widely shared, and in fact, what we learned in the worst incident that happened while I was there, the Abdul Muttalib underwear bomber, which fortunately didn't result in deaths, we found that the problem was too much sharing of intelligence and therefore inability to separate the wheat from the chaff and all. So, but I thought that same concentrated spirit was missing for other issues like the ones that had mission managers established, the one that you and Joe worked in, role and the Afghanistan mission manager, and there were a few others. And in those areas, you needed a DNI in order to hold the intelligence community, not just an individual agency, but the community responsible for getting results on the things that we really wanted to, the things that we really needed to know. And so I think that the primary thing we're missing is, again, an opportunity to be able to do it better on the key questions that we that won't just happen automatically. You work in the intelligence community a long time, and the people who work a particular area know each other, whether they're in CIA or NSA or NGA. They get together and they do the best they can. But that's different from having getting the heads of those departments around the table and have a Joe DeTrani brief them on how are we doing on North Korea. Oh, we're really trying hard. Yeah, but have we found this information, that information, the other information, and what do you need to get it done? And okay, NSA provide 4 more people, devote more resources, CIA do this. I mean, you just don't get the results by consensus that you on the big issues that you do when you have somebody who has some authority and a striped shirt and a whistle. So I think that's what we're missing when we weaken ODNI, which I agree with you. It's been happening for the last 20 years. I mean, that was part of the reason that I left was that CIA was the happy child in an orphanage, and I was the guy in charge of the orphanage, and they managed to convince the parents that they'd be better off outside. So I think it's wrong. I think we're weakening our intelligence capability on the things that you mentioned. I can't think of in recent years, I think the intelligence community has gotten many of the policy things right. I don't think there were any illusions about what was really happening in Afghanistan or in Iraq. I think the reporting was good, and it was telling the real story. I think that I think that was pretty accurate. I think some of the battlefield cooperation on intelligence in those places, Iraq and Afghanistan, was stellar. A number of people being killed by IEDs before the intelligence community got its act together with things like R2RG. The combined efforts in some of those intelligence centers were terrible, and they were improved very quickly with intelligence playing a large role. So I think there were some successes, but I think we would have even more successes with a strong DNI, and very few people understand that because of the way it works. And my views on covert action were also pretty well known. I thought it had been an awful lot of it was not only wasted but counterproductive, and it was dominating the White House's idea of what intelligence was all about, drones in particular. Everybody involved with the drone program knew that drone program was not going to win the war in Afghanistan, win the war in Iraq, defeat Osama bin Laden by itself. And yet, as Director Panetta famously said, it was the only game in town. So we kept on doing it. We kept on looking under the light post, and the CIA used that to make itself indispensable. So I think it's hurting the country to weaken the DNI and the ODNI.
Thank you, Dennis. Last question, Nobuo Tanaka from Tokyo. Go ahead.
Tanaka-san.
Hi,
Yeah.
hi, Dennis. Very good to see you. It's great. We worked together at the Sasakawa time,
Right.
and I thank you for supporting me or promoting the idea of Japan having the nuclear propulsion submarine. I'm working on that still with Korean collaboration, Korea, Japan, US, JCAS project. But Mr. Trump's, this diplomacy is just making me a little bit worrisome, because he is taking sides always with kind of winners. I mean, Russia versus Ukraine, Israel versus Iran. He will take action on the side of winning part. So that means that Japan or Korea facing China, North Korea, Russia, we have to be winner to make sure that the United States will help us to protect. So that means I'm just getting nervous that maybe the nuclear the weaponization, to have a nuclear weapon for Japan or Korea could be much more serious issue now with Trump's diplomacy. But I don't have any doubt about our alliance or extended deterrence. But I feel very much worrisome about the discussion here in Japan about the nuclearization of the country. What do you think? I mean, Trump is really want Korea or Japan to have a nuclear weapon? What do you think?
Thank you,
Yeah.
Noble.
We had a pretty extended discussion of that, Noble, before you were able to join us. And I think those of us on the call who've thought about this believe that there are some measures that could be taken between the United States and Japan, between the United States and Korea, that would increase the credibility of extended deterrence. That would, I think, certainly satisfy most Americans, and I would hope would satisfy Japanese and Koreans as well. And they mostly the sorts of things that were developed in NATO when NATO countries had similar doubts or concerns about the American extended deterrence. So everything up to dual capable aircraft with American weapons stationed in that country, exercises, declarations, open discussions. As some of our participants pointed out, Americans weren't even allowed to say the word nuclear 10, 15 years ago when in open discussions with Japan and Korea, and now they're very much discussed. So I think we can figure out a way to provide reinforced extended deterrence, short of Japan and North Korea building nuclear weapons of their own, which I think would be enormously difficult politically and would take a huge amount of political capital that could be better spent on other things to deal with China.
Thank you very much, Dennis. This is a great evening. Admiral, we thank you very much. And we'll get back to you, Dennis.
Okay.
Have a great evening.
Good
Thank
to
you.
see everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Admiral.
Thank you.
So long.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Okay.